A hard day when I watched Robert pack his briefcase from the doorway of our bedroom. Our relationship seemed like a thick cloud that had descended upon our previously contented house, strangling the tension between us. My voice was hardly audible above a whisper when I continued, "I can't believe you're doing this." Glancing up, Robert's eyes were icy. "Susan, what? Heading into the office? This family needs someone to keep things going." His reasons were a stark reminder of the choice I had made only a few days prior, and they hurt and cut deep. I stepped back into the room and said, "You know that's not fair." In response, simmering in my chest was anger. "I quit my job for us, for our family," I said, my frustration evident as he snapped his briefcase shut. "No, you left your work because the strain was too much for you to bear. You now want me to take up the slack too," he replied. I winced at his words. They made a big impression. It was true that I had been finding it difficult to get used to being a stay-at-home mother. However, I never anticipated Robert's level of hatred. "I'm trying, Robert," I responded, my voice quivering with passion. "It's not easy to give up a career I loved." With a heavy sigh, he ran a hand over his hair. "I'm not looking for a fight this evening. We have some serious business to discuss." The sound of little feet pattering down the hallway stopped us before we could say anything more. With her teddy bear fiercely clasped to her bosom and her golden locks ruffled, our daughter Anna emerged from the doorway. She questioned naively, "Mommy, Daddy, why are you fighting?" I knelt to her level and feigned a grin. "Dear, we're not fighting. Just now, Daddy and I were chatting." Anna was scooped up by Robert, who then kissed her forehead. "Your mom is correct, Princess. Everything is all right. How about you go look for Grandma? She's probably preparing pancakes." I felt a tinge of regret as Anna ran off. How many times had small ears heard our arguments? Robert put down his suitcase and his face softened a little. "All right, tonight we'll discuss. I have a suggestion that might help us get back on course." I simply nodded, not believing I could say anything. I had the unshakable impression that something was very wrong in our family between us. As he was leaving for work, I was nervous about the conversation we would be having that evening and what it would mean for our future. Because of the nagging doubt, dull chores, and my in-laws' constant chatting, the day dragged on. I was uncomfortable and hungry, waiting for the adult talk that didn't revolve around gossip or grandkids. By the time Robert got back home with the kids well asleep, we retired to the study after supper. Breaking the quiet, Robert leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. He started off by saying, "I've been thinking about how we can tackle some of our challenges." I arched an eyebrow. With a little smile on his lips, he nodded. "What if we buy my parents a house with some of our savings? They could get closer, assist with the kids more, and take up a lot of the burden for the two of us," Robert suggested. I sensed the room's air disappearing. "Our reserves?" I questioned. "The funds we set aside for our future? The college funds for the kids?" Robert stopped smiling. "I assumed you would be pleased with this. It offers a lot of solutions to our issues." I raised my voice. "Or the issues with your parents." With a look of annoyance on his face, Robert stood up. "Why do you make things so hard for me? It's the best course of action for our family." I watched in disbelief as he stormed out. Was anything like this actually taking place? Had my spouse suddenly proposed, without my consent, to spend our life savings to purchase a home for his parents? Feeling more alone than ever, I buried my face in my hands. What was going to happen to me, and more importantly, how had we arrived at this point? I heard quiet sounds coming from the kitchen the following morning, which I assumed to be those of Robert and his mother. I walked down the corridor, being cautious not to trip on the noisy floorboard next to the stairs. "Mom, she's being unreasonable," Robert said in a clear voice. I assumed she would be pleased with this. His mother gave a kind but clear response. "Oh my goodness, some ladies simply cannot bear the demands of raising a family. Not every person is suited for it." I bit my lip as hurt and rage battled within me. Is that how people understood me? That I was unable to manage it? "Perhaps if we just move forward with the plans," Robert said, "she might change her mind. Really, it's for the best." I'd had enough. Not bothering to hide, I stormed into the kitchen. "Robert, for whom is this best?" I demanded. With remorse lighting over their cheeks, they both sprang up. First to recover, Robert's mother put on a cheesy smile. "Good morning, my love. How was your night's sleep?" Disregarding her, I concentrated on my husband. "Were you going to talk behind my back about this, or were you going to discuss it with me at all?" Even Robert seemed a little embarrassed. "Susan, that isn't how it is. We were only talking. Talking about making big financial decisions without me? About the future, ours and our children's?" His mother intervened, always the mediator. "Let's not get too fired up just yet. Would you mind if I took the kids to the park so you two could have some alone time?" She was yelling for Anna and Mark as she hurried out of the kitchen before I could object. There was a sharp stillness between Robert and me when the front door closed. "You cannot continue doing this," I murmured quietly. "You cannot continue to exclude me from decisions that impact our family." Robert let out a sigh and ran his fingers through his hair. "Susan, I'm not shoving you out. I'm searching for answers." "Robert, you've been the one who's been distant," I snapped. "You've been acting like a failure ever since you persuaded me to quit my job because you said I needed to focus on the family." I reasoned, moving away from him as he grabbed me. "That is incorrect. Simply put, I believed that doing this would simplify things. Your parents might assist with the children, and you'd receive more assistance." "More assistance?" I gave a sour laugh. "Your father hardly recognizes me, and your mother can hardly contain her hatred for me." Robert grew stern-faced. "That is unfair. They have been really supportive since you left your work." "Supportive?" I sneered. "They have been choking me. You want to spend our money to buy them a house, but I can't make a single choice about our kids without your mother questioning me." He raised his palms. "What else should we do with it? We could use the assistance since it is currently available." I looked into his eyes and saw him clearly for the first time in many months. "This man is not the one I wed, this is someone else entirely." "Robert, I can't handle this anymore," I said. "I refuse to be excluded within my own family." His face became more composed. "Come on, Susan. We are able to resolve this. We just must." He was cut off by the sound of the front door opening, the enthusiastic chatter of our children filling the home, accompanied by the voices of his parents. "Daddy! Mommy!" Anna yelled. "See what we discovered at the park." I forced a grin onto my face as our daughter ran into the kitchen, brandishing a glittering pebble. However, I saw Robert's mother's rough glance above her head. She was certain that she had won this round. I silently vowed as I bent to gaze at Anna's treasure, this wasn't the end. I wouldn't allow them to drive me away from my own family. Something needed to shift quickly. Staring at the laptop screen in front of me, I sat at the kitchen table. I could see glimmers of the life I had left behind in each email and message that scrolled by. My fingers ached to write a resume so I could go back to practicing law, where I used to be quite successful. I was brought back to reality by the sound of Robert's car driving into the driveway. I shut off the laptop quickly as remorse overcame me. How did I get here? Hadn't I promised my family this? When Robert spotted me, his face lit up as he came in. "There you are. Hello. We could take the kids out to supper today. What do you think?" I faked a laugh. "That sounds fantastic. Where are the children?" He answered, "Mom took them to the mall. She said something about fresh school clothes." My lips twisted into a grin. "Did she?" I believed that this weekend we had decided to accomplish it together. Without seeming to notice my dismay, Robert shrugged. "Mom extended an offer. I thought you would get a vacation from it." "A break?" As if I needed to get away from my own children. I tried not to cry while I swallowed my hurt. "Robert, we need to talk about your parents, about this whole scenario." His shoulders stiffened as he groaned. "Not this again, Susan. I believed that this was behind us, that the past was the past, me making decisions for our family." I got up, my rage exploding. "Robert, you can't just keep making decisions on your own, especially not about our savings." He narrowed his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" I inhaled deeply. Earlier, I heard you talking on the phone. You were conversing with a real estate agent, right? Robert looked surprised and flushed. It was only a preliminary discussion. I was obtaining data. Without first speaking with me, I concluded on his behalf. He raked a hand through his hair once again, his voice brimming with frustration. Susan, what do you want from me? I'm attempting to act in our family's best interests. Our family, I said once again. Not the talk of your folks, not the idealized version of our family that your mother has. We, Robert, me, you, and the children. He fired back. My parents are part of our family too. Why do you not see that? Something inside of me snapped. Because they're assuming control. Your father ignores me during family dinners, your mother scolds me for being a parent, and you're allowing it to happen. Robert grew stern-faced. That is unfair. They only want to help. I chuckled in disbelief. Is that what you call it when your mother insults my parenting? When your father avoids me at family dinners? Robert responded. You're exaggerating, but I could tell he was doubting himself. I took a step forward and spoke in a deep, low voice. Robert, am I mistaken? Tell me this. When was the last time your parents weren't involved in a choice that we decided on together? He parted his lips, then shut them again, unable to respond. That's what I thought, I said as my strength began to go. Robert, I can't continue to live this way. There must be a change. I briefly had a glimpse of the thoughtful, kind man I'd married. However, he soon closed his face once more. You're accurate, something indeed has to change. You must acknowledge that this is how we now live, Susan. My folks are here to stay. We'll all be happier if you embrace that sooner rather than later. I was filled with shock and sadness as I looked at him. Had this actually been the state of our marriage? The sound of the front door opening and the eager talk of our kids were followed by the resounding voice of Robert's mother. She called, "We're back. And wait until you see what we bought." Robert turned to meet his mother and our children, giving me a look that suggested quite obviously that our talk had ended. As I stood there, horrifying reality overwhelmed me. This was no longer simply about Robert's parents. This had to do with our marriage's future, and for the first time I wasn't sure whether it really had one. I sat at the desk in our shared study, pen poised over paper, heart thumping in my chest. The place was oddly quiet. This was it, the breaking point. I looked at my watch. It was 2:37 a.m. with his head still in the clouds. Robert had no idea that our world was about to rock. The kids were safely nestled into their beds, oblivious to the unrest that had been building for several months. My hand trembled as I started writing. The kids and I will be gone by the time you read this, Robert. This is no longer how I can live. My eyesight became blurry as I released years of grief, disappointment, and betrayal onto the paper. I wrote about my experiences of being ignored, about his parents' persistent interference, and about the dreams I had given up only to be viewed as an outsider in my own home. I let out a sob as I signed my name at the bottom. I smothered the sob quickly, not wanting to wake anyone. This was not the future we had planned together, and it was not how I had expected my life to turn out. However, things happen, people change, and sometimes you have to have the courage to alter your own narrative. I carefully folded the letter and put it where Robert could see it, in the middle of his desk. Quietly, I made my way upstairs in an attempt to rouse the kids. "Mommy!" I shook Anna gently awake, and she murmured something sleepy. "What's wrong?" she inquired while rubbing her eyes. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart," I whispered and lied. "We're taking a little getaway. Could you please assist me with your brother, like a big girl?" Though still half sleepy, she nodded. Being the lighter sleeper of the two, Mark was usually simpler to wake up. In a matter of minutes, I had them both dressed and prepared to depart, holding their beloved stuffed animals firmly in their arms. I held my breath as we tiptoed down the steps, hoping that Robert wouldn't wake up. His snoring from our bedroom was a comforting sound, but it also cut deeply. I no longer felt like I knew this man who I had previously loved more than anything. We arrived at the car without any problems. Anna's little voice sliced through the evening air as I strapped the children into their seats. "Where's Daddy, Mommy? Will he not go with us?" Even though I knew the question was coming, I froze, unprepared for it. No, my dear, Daddy must remain here, but don't worry, we'll see him shortly. Even though the lie hurt my tongue, I couldn't bring myself to utterly destroy their reality, not quite yet. My attention was drawn to a movement as I slid into the driver's seat. Robert's mother was standing there in the upstairs window. When our gazes locked, time seemed to stop. I saw the beginning of comprehension, a spark of wrath, and then, shockingly, something that nearly seemed like satisfaction. I fired the engine and slid out of the driveway. Without thinking, I drove through the lonely, dark streets with shaking palms on the steering wheel. To what destination were we heading? How would we proceed? My head was filled with questions that felt like they would never end. However, I felt calmer when I looked at my sleeping kids in the rearview mirror. We would work things out. It was necessary for us to. My phone buzzed just as the first rays of dawn were starting to strike the sky. My blood ran cold as I saw Robert's name flash on the screen with the sentence, "You have no right to remove my kids. My attorney will get back to you, Susan. You're not going to get away with this." My resolve strengthened, and I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. Now there was no turning back. I would confront the next challenge and any upcoming struggles for the sake of my children and myself. I allowed myself a tiny grin as the sun rose, casting a picture of opportunity and optimism over the earth. This was only the start of a new chapter in our narrative, not its conclusion. I arrived at a dilapidated motel's parking lot, fatigued filling my body despite the mess in our lives. The children's faces were serene as they slept soundly in the back seat. I was about to cry as I propped my head on the steering wheel when I heard a tap on the window. "Susan, is that you?" Blinking in shock, I looked up. My high school best friend Carolyn was there, gazing through the glass, a face I hadn't seen in a long time. "Carolyn," I gasped out, wiped my eyes hastily, and got out of the car. "What are you doing here?" She drew me into a close embrace. "This place is managed by me, yet I forget about myself. What is happening? Are you all right?" Something inside me shattered at the concern in her voice. Before I knew it, I was crying in her arms and telling her the entire tale in between breaths. With each phrase, Carolyn's expression became more serious as she "Listen," Carolyn gave me a shoulder squeeze after I was done. "You won't remain in this hole. Come on, I'll give you my extra room." After an hour, the kids were nestled into cozy beds, and I took a seat at Carolyn's kitchen table, enjoying a warm cup of tea. "So what's your plan?" Carolyn inquired politely. Feeling confused, I gazed into my tea. "I'm not sure. I simply could not stay there any longer. However, I can see from Robert's text that he will fight for the kids." Carolyn's eyes became stony. "Now you attack. Susan, you've always been the sharpest person I know. You're capable of doing this," I said. "I don't even have an attorney." As the truth of my position hit home, a cunning smirk appeared on Carolyn's face. "To be honest, I think I could assist with that. Do you recall Peter from your time in high school?" A beat skipped in my heart. Peter was the boy I'd secretly lusted after for years. "What about him?" "He's a divorce lawyer now, one of the best in the state," reasoned Carolyn. She paused, then took a step forward. "He always had a thing for you." My cheeks began to flush, and then I felt guilty. As I was leaving my spouse, I found myself blushing over a crush from high school. "Jazz Jine, I cannot afford a top-tier attorney." I moved on from everything. Carolyn dismissively waved her hand. "Let me speak with him. Just get along with him." My phone buzzed with another text from Robert. Before I could reply, I read the message. "My folks are worried. How could you harm our family in this way? I'll make sure you never see the kids again. Go home immediately." I showed Carolyn the message, my hands shaking. Her expression grew serious. "That resolves the matter. Peter is the first person I'm phoning in the morning." That night, I couldn't fall asleep. While I lay in bed, the sensation that I was perched on a cliff persisted in my mind. Peter's meeting seemed like the end of the road, like my marriage had officially ended. However, as I considered Robert's icy reasons and his parents' oppressive presence, I concluded that my marriage had long since ended. I just hadn't had the guts to say it. I heard Carolyn's voice in the corridor when I woke up the following morning. "Yes, Peter, you can meet her at 2 p.m. Many thanks for it." Carolyn turned to face me as I came out of the bedroom, her expression a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Susan, Peter's agreed to meet with you today." My heart pounded. This was the turning point in my life and the turning point in my children's lives as well. "Great! I said, astonished by the volume of my voice. I hugged my drowsy kids and got ready for the day. As I did, hope kindled in me, something I hadn't felt in years. I no longer felt alone. No matter what lay ahead, I felt ready to fight for the life I deserved for the first time in a very long time. I waited in Peter's office, smoothing down my shirt and attempting to get my anxiety under control. It was obvious he had changed from the bashful youngster I recalled. When he stepped in, Peter held out his hand with a confident, comforting look on his face. "It's been too long, Susan. I apologize that we have to meet in this manner." A familiar flutter emerged in my gut as we sat down, but I ignored it. This was about my future, my children's future, not about past crushes or what-ifs. Peter listened carefully as I described my circumstances, his brow furrowing at every new detail. He leaned forward, his gaze fierce after I was done. "I will not sugarcoat this, Susan. This may turn heated, especially with Robert's parents involved and his wealth. However, I can assure you that we will battle to the death." Something within me was sparked by his words, a fire I had long since extinguished. "How do we start?" We plotted for the next 60 minutes as Peter described our strategy. I sensed the return of my previous legal feelings as we began discussing the details. When my phone beeped, I quickly looked at the screen. "It's Robert. I have to take this." As I left Peter's office, I answered the call. "Where are you, Susan?" Robert's tone was composed and icy. "My parents are devastated. The children must be brought home right now." Taking a deep breath, I prepared myself. "No, Robert, I'm not going to return. I've hired an attorney. Please get in touch with him for any further matters." A moment of startled silence fell. Then Robert's voice became angry. "Do you really believe you can take my kids and get away with it, Susan? I'm going to ruin you. You'll be lucky if you see them again when I'm through." The call ended abruptly. Peter put his hand on my shoulder, pulling me back to the present moment as I stood there trembling. "Are you all right?" he asked, his expression filled with worry. I nodded and wiped away the tears I wasn't even aware I was shedding. "Peter, he made threats to abduct the children." "How?" With his hands resting on my shoulders, he said, "Hey, we will not let it occur. Susan, you're not alone in this battle. You're stronger than you realize." I was overcome with feelings as I stared into his eyes, including dread, thankfulness, and something more I couldn't quite put my finger on. I took a step back and collected myself. "What should we do next?" Peter's face took on a serious expression. "We must apply for temporary custody right now. We also need to discuss your career." Puzzled, I blinked. "My profession?" But I abandoned that. "Exactly," Peter stated in a stern tone. "In court, that will be used against us. We must demonstrate your ability to care for the kids independently." It struck me like a stone. I had sacrificed everything for my family, and now I could lose my kids because of that one sacrifice. Uncertainty began to seep in. I don't know if I can go back." Peter grew more determined. "Susan, the woman I knew in high school, was a determined individual who could accomplish anything. You only need to locate her again because that woman is still there." That day, when I walked out of Peter's office, my head was spinning. Rebuilding my profession, fighting Robert and his parents, and attempting to keep my kids safe felt like an impossible task. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimpse of optimism. Anna's big eyes met mine as I tucked her and Mark into bed that evening. "When are we going home, Mama?" she asked. My heart tightened. "Oh, my dear," I replied, drawing her near. "We're at home now. Our home is wherever we are when we are together." I vowed in silence as I held my daughter. I would build us a new home, one that was free of love, respect, and hardship. No matter how long it took or how fierce the battle was, I was prepared for the difficult path ahead. The old Susan was coming to her senses and ready to reclaim her life. In front of me stood the courtroom, a rising reminder of the conflict I was about to engage in. Grasping my suitcase firmly, I attempted to calm my anxiety. Our interim custody court hearing was today, and I knew that Robert and his parents would make a big deal out of it. Peter touched my shoulder with a kind hand. "You can succeed, Susan. Keep in mind all we've planned." I nodded, and as we stepped into the building, I inhaled deeply. I saw Robert, his parents, and their attorney huddled together. My fury boiled at my mother-in-law's nasty expression. When the hearing started, I watched in growing terror as Robert's attorney presented me as an unstable, careless mother who had deserted her family on a whim. They brought up my choice to resign from my position, misrepresenting it as proof that I couldn't support the kids. When it was our turn, Peter expertly made our case, emphasizing my years of successful legal profession and commitment to my kids. However, I noticed the judge's doubtful look. Uncertainty tore at me. Had I committed a grave error? During our recess break, I noticed Robert's mother talking loudly in the hallway. Naturally, as soon as we gain custody, we'll be moving in to help with the kids instead of some unstable mother who can't decide what she wants out of life. They need a secure environment. A part of me broke. I marched up to her before I had a chance to consider. How could you? I growled. From the beginning, you have been attempting to push me away. Guess what, though? I'm over being treated unfairly. I will use every ounce of my strength to battle you for those children of mine. Robert's father moved to separate us. Susan, you've gone insane. Right now, you're supporting our argument that you're unfit to be a parent. When I turned to face Carolyn, her eyes were flaming. I felt a touch on my arm. Remove yourself, she told my in-laws. You are no longer allowed to harass her. Peter showed up as a gathering formed, and he gently drew me away. This isn't helping, Susan. We must pay attention to the hearing. However, the harm had already been done. As soon as we entered the courtroom again, I sensed the judge's critical stare. My outburst had given Robert the upper hand. Given the evidence submitted and the recent display in the hallway, I'm inclined to grant temporary custody to the father with supervised visits for the mother, the judge said, clearing his throat. The entire globe appeared to tilt. My breathing stopped. This cannot be happening. Peter asked for a break right away, and the judge reluctantly agreed. I followed him into a private conference room, feeling drowsy. Susan, pay attention to me, Peter pleaded. We still have work to do, but we must adjust our strategy. You must demonstrate to the judge that you are a responsible, stable parent who prioritizes your kids. With tears flowing down my cheeks, I gave a mute nod. But Peter, how are they going to take my babies? I can't let them go. His gaze was fierce as he held on to my shoulders. I need you to get yourself together because we are going to fight this. I know the Susan who never gives up. She refuses to be bullied by anyone. Where's that Susan? His comments ignited a flame of purpose within me, piercing through my sadness. I straightened my back as I wiped my eyes. She is here, and she is prepared for battle. As we were about to enter the courtroom again, I saw Robert and his parents. Their arrogant looks strengthened my determination. This was no longer just about me. It was also about proving to my kids what it meant to stand up for oneself and escape their hold on me. After inhaling deeply, I squared my shoulders. The conflict had not ended, it was only getting started, and this time I was prepared for battle. With my pulse racing, I watched the judge get ready to hand down his decision in the courtroom. It had taken months of struggles, restless nights, and unwavering resolve to get to this point. Seated on the other side were Robert and his parents, their expressions a mix of hate and confidence. The judge's voice echoed through the hushed chamber as he spoke. This court has carefully considered all presented evidence in the matter of custody for Mark and Anna. Feeling Peter's comforting presence alongside me, I held my breath. The world appeared to stop when the judge announced that Susan Matthews would receive primary custody and that Robert Matthews would have significant visitation rights. As the court proceeded to go over the specifics of the custody agreement, I could only concentrate on the tremendous sensation of relief and vindication that rushed over me. I heard Robert's mother gasp and saw Robert's face crumple in shock. Peter looked up at me, his smile contagious and encouraging. More than that, it made my heart skip a beat. Robert came over to me outside the courthouse, his parents watching from a distance. Susan, I'm sorry for everything, he murmured quietly. I nodded, astonished that I didn't feel angry. I apologize as well, Robert, but this is best for all of us. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as they left. Not only had I prevailed in the custody dispute, but I had won my independence. Carolyn came running up and gave me a bear hug. "You succeeded, girl. I knew you could." I laughed so hard that happy tears ran down my cheeks. "Carolyn, without you, I could not have succeeded. You gave me hope when I had none that night at the hotel, and you rescued me." She gave my hand a squeeze. "That is the purpose of friends. Go now and enjoy the occasion with your children and perhaps a certain attractive lawyer." I looked at Peter, who was putting his briefcase away. His face flushed, and my gut gave me that recognizable flutter as our eyes locked. After a happy reunion with Anna and Mark later that evening, I sat on Carolyn's porch and watched the sunset. Peter came over to join me, holding 2 glasses of wine. He handed me a glass and said, "To new beginnings." I grinned and gently tapped my glass against his. "Towards fresh starts." Peter finally spoke after a little period of comfortable silence. "You know, Susan, from what I've been seeing these past few months, you're amazing. I can see that you've changed from that first day when you came into my office because of the way you battled for yourself and your kids." I nodded, a wave of pride rising within me. "I'm not. I just discovered aspects of myself that I had assumed were lost forever." Peter reached out to touch me, and his touch ignited something within me. "Maybe we could grab dinner sometime, just the 2 of us, now that the dust has settled." I saw warmth, adoration, and the potential for more as I gazed into his eyes. I paused for a second, old worries threatening to resurface, but then I remembered all that I had accomplished and all that I had conquered. "Yes, please," I murmured quietly. I thought back on my journey, including the hardships, times of hopelessness, and agony that had led me here. As the last of the sunshine illuminated the sky in dazzling hues, I realized this was where it had all led. I had regained my strength, my freedom, and a network of support I never realized I needed. Even though the future was still unknown, I felt optimistic about it for the first time in a long time. I still had my independence, my kids, and maybe a future full of love ahead of me.